I've been saying it out loud for the past 6 months. You could tell that a bloodbath was coming in college football coaching, honestly, back in January. It took me a few months to process it. And the reason I say that is last year, very light with the coaching carousel circuit. I believe only one Power Four head coach had turnover, was changed or fired before bowl season last year. The year before, there was a turnover of, I believe, is either 14, 15, or 16. Fact check me on that exact number. But 14, 15, or 16 coaches that offseason. And it felt like last year there was a lot of programs, Virginia Tech being one of them. UCLA was different because, man, Deshaun Foster was only there for one season and a quarter. But Brent Pry, you know, there were some people saying, hey, they should have made this switch last year. They give them the extra year. I think we're going to see a lot of that in the NIL era. But my point is, a lot of teams last year, I think, kicked the can, wanted to give their coach another shot. I think you see that with Florida as well, Billy Napier. I think, Luke Fickell. We'll see what happens at Wisconsin. Brian Kelly, some people were calling for him. Obviously, he's on a better path. But today, it's UCLA and Deshaun Foster and Virginia Tech with Brent Pry. I've been around both programs. I was in person at UCLA the past 2 years. So I saw Chip Kelly 2 years ago and talked with him. I called Dante Moore's first start, funny enough. And you kind of got a feel for the trajectory UCLA was on in terms of NIL and the transfer portal. And then I called last year Virginia Tech versus Marshall in person and visited with Brent Pry's staff. But obviously, last night, UCLA loses to New Mexico 35-10. Terrible, especially after a bad loss versus UNLV. The switch, no surprise there. Virginia Tech gets beat down by Virginia Tech. Probably doesn't even call them a rival, but Old Dominion definitely calls them a rival. And so you can see some of this coming. And I'm a guy that had to deal with 2 in-season coaching turnovers. When I played at USC, I was there for Lane Kiffin when he got fired about this time, and Ed Orgeron took over. And then I was there for Steve Sarkisian when he got fired, and Clay Helton had to take over. So I'm well versed in the optics of this and why it happens. But I'll start with UCLA. The reality is this is something you could see coming, period, which is always like a hindsight 2020 take. But you could totally see this coming. And I never specifically said that about Deshaun Foster. But what I did say is the second UCLA said they were joining the Big Ten, I said, be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you wish for. Because in the era of NIL and transfer portal and moving to the Big Ten, there was a very easy scenario where the UCLA football program just couldn't keep up with the programs they were going to in the Big Ten. And they were already on a trajectory in the Pac-12 of not being able to keep up. Because historically, what's been the advantage of UCLA? It's been where they're physically located. Where by default, they would get a good recruiting class. You saw it in the last years of the transfer portal and in the Pac-12 where ASU was coming in and taking that secondary Southern California talent after both Oregon and USC had their pick of the litter. You saw it when I was there towards the end of the 2010s in the University of Washington. They were coming down and poaching the leftover talent from Southern California. And there's enough to have leftover talent once USC gets their pick, once Oregon gets their pick. And then also the trend that was happening is teams from the Big Ten. It's well documented that teams, Ohio State, even Penn State, Michigan, Clemson in the ACC, Alabama. This generation of college football player is much more nationalized. They're much more willing to go away from the nest. UCLA's advantage in the 2000s was like, man, I want my family to see me play. Man, why would I go to the SEC country? Why would I go to Big Ten country? The optics of how 18-year-olds view that now is different, which has worked against UCLA. So you could see this coming for Deshaun Foster and any head coach that they would have hired, and it will still continue to be an issue for whoever ends up replacing Deshaun Foster. Their advantage was where they were located. That was no longer an advantage in today's era. And their disadvantage for UCLA, which will be the biggest concern for whoever they sell this job to and whoever they get moving forward, is the lack of investment from UCLA. I mean, it's beating a dead horse every single time. And honestly, kind of annoys me when the classic like tweet the picture of the Rose Bowl and just be like, oh, look how empty it is. All right, that was cool for like the first 2 years. We're on like year 6 of doing that. So everyone gets the deal. It's very much a factor, very much a problem. Yes, UCLA should build an on-campus stadium, just like Pitt should go back to building an on-campus stadium. What a mistake that was for Pitt. That would have been rocking. But it's not going to happen for UCLA. There's no land in LA. So anyone who says build an on-campus stadium, like that sounds great. And it's like, all right, sweet. I get a bunch of retweets and a bunch of likes. It's not happening. Where they should do it is this over-budgeted light rail concept that goes right through Westwood. I drove past it last week when I was getting an In-N-Out burger with my wife. That's like what, millions of dollars over budget? Might even be $1 billion over budget. Could be wrong there. Anyways, like that right there, right next to LA Fitness and Westwood, that's where they should build the on-campus stadium. That would be active. There actually kind of is some land there, but it's not going to happen. The one thing that I would entertain, play your games at SoFi Stadium if you're UCLA. I know there's the pull to the Rose Bowl, and it would be super sad, and all the historians, and you're talking to a guy that, man, I'm still pissed that the Pac-12 doesn't exist. You know, I love West Coast, old school, the tradition there. UCLA, think about playing your games at SoFi Stadium. I think it would be much easier for students to get to. It would be much easier to get the Inglewood area where a good chunk of your recruits are coming from, get their parents to the game. And the reality is, it would be much easier to hide when you only have 15,000 people in the stadium. Fill up the lower bowl of SoFi so your cameras can see that and it looks happening and you're not seeing the upper bowl. It would be really sad to all the UCLA historians, but maybe that's what you need to do to turn the page on what has been a very dull 6 or 7 years for UCLA football. There's been a changing of the guard and a changing of college football world with the transfer portal and NIL. You move to the Big Ten. It's no longer the Pac-12. I would put serious thought to playing your games at SoFi Stadium if I was UCLA. I feel bad for Deshaun Foster, but I think the second we all saw that Big Ten Media Day interview, I think we were all like, ooh, baby. And it's always tough you never want to get on a guy too early, but man, if you're going to be a head coach and have to communicate your vision and go and sell to donors and go and galvanize a locker room and go and talk to moms and dads on the recruiting trail and and I know he's a great recruiter, but that press conference, man, you could see it coming. That just doesn't happen for elite head coaches. I mean, you just look at name the top 50 coaches in college football. And I don't really know what happened there. And I get you might have a panic attack, and I have empathy for that or whatever that was. I still don't even know what it was. And I think the reason I don't know what it was is because I think everyone felt uncomfortable like reporting on that Big Ten Media Days wonder that we just kind of moved on and tried to cut them some slack. But you just can't cut a head coach some slack. It just doesn't work that way. So that's a long-winded way of saying tough stretch for Deshaun Foster. This is just the beginning for UCLA. Because that investment piece and where they're at in the Big Ten and the hierarchy there and the Rose Bowl dynamic and just the whole deal, not looking good for UCLA. Very intrigued how they're going to sell the next head coach, because you need someone that can come into UCLA and get those boosters excited. So it's not just the Wasserman family as the UCLA's lead booster. And you get all sorts of different boosters and you get fans to the stadium. You know, a name that like comes to my mind right away is like, would Deion Sanders take that job? For Deion's perspective, and that's just a talking point, but that's what, a Power 4 job. He doesn't have a Power 4 job right now at Colorado. But like, I don't want that job if I'm Deion right now. Right now, Colorado is a better job than UCLA. It just is. It just is. Right now. That could change in a year. And there's a lot more there. I mean, UCLA and Stanford could both hit rock bottom, and then maybe that's the incentive that has their boosters wake up. But I want to get on to Virginia Tech before we run out of time here. Virginia Tech, Brent Pry, he's gone. I enjoyed my time with Brent Pry. I think he's a really good football coach. I don't think it worked out for him, and a big reason why. And I'm not blaming it all on one guy. but he hitched his wagon to the Kyron Drones trajectory, and that trajectory never came to life. It never came to life. And Drones is not the only issue. I think Virginia Tech's in an awkward spot where NIL wise, they have enough money to be competitive, but you saw it. I mean, everyone's making a huge deal about Mansour Delane, LSU star corner. Where'd they get him from? They got him from Brent Pry's secondary a year ago. That's the type of guy that does he stay if the NIL's in a different spot, if the team's in a different spot. So this is layered for sure. I'll say this. The first time that I had real concern was when, I'm blanking on his name right now, but when Virginia Tech's offensive coordinator left this offseason to go to Ohio State and be their offensive line coach. How many times do you hear a coordinator leave their spot at a credible spot at like Virginia Tech and go be an offensive line coach? That's a demotion. Yes, I know you're going and coaching for the defending national titles, national champions. And I know you're coaching for Ryan Day, and he's a great coach. Very rare to hear of a coordinator say, you know what? I'm going to pass on my play calling duties and I'm going to go be a position coach somewhere else. Very rare. And in my opinion, I think he saw the writing on the wall of this staff might get fired. And I don't believe in my signal caller. So I'm going to get out now and go be the offensive line coach at Ohio State. One sec. TikTok's making sure I'm still live and making sure I'm not a robot. And I'm blanking on his name right now. Chat, help me out if you remember it. Gosh, what's that guy's name? But he was great to me. I had 2 Virginia Tech games last year, but I think he saw, hey, Kyron Drones played really well to end 2023. And rightfully so, we gave him a bunch of expectations that Kyron Drones is going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the ACC. And that dude looks like a baller. That dude coming off the bus, 6'4", probably 235, can run. He's got a huge arm. He's got the sick visor. He's rocking number 1. He's got the swag. That dude looks phenomenal coming off the bus. But it just has never worked out. He's never developed in the passing game. And you can tell, and I admire the belief that Pry stuck with him and said, he's my guy. And again, I'm very wary that I don't want it to be Kyron Drones got Brent Pry fired. That's not the case. Brent Pry could have gone a different direction. Brent Pry could have made a different decision. Could have gone with what's his their backup has that fun name. Pop. Anyways, or at least last year that was his name. But it just, you believed in that hype. Brent Pry had great momentum. The 2024 offseason. Before that season, it was so much excitement. I called their game week 3. It was Virginia Tech was a lot of people's ACC dark horse. Last year, they lose a close one to Miami. That's an interesting one, too. They lost a close one to Miami, and they lost a close one to Syracuse. I called that Syracuse game. If they win those games, maybe the optics of what this last offseason was different and the energy around the team was different. But I just think they never were able to capture the momentum they had coming off the 2023 season and build that into something more sustainable. So, bummer for Brent Pry and this staff. But Hokie fans, you'll love to hear me say this. As a West Coast guy who I didn't really know much about, my early memories in college football was like watching Enter Sandman and being all juiced up and watching. I'm too young to. It's weird saying that. I'm 30, but I'm too young to remember Mike Vick in college. But I remember Marcus Vick. I remember Tyrod Taylor, and those were electric environments. My point is, Virginia Tech is a really good head coaching job. Opposite from what I said to you about UCLA. UCLA, I wouldn't want that head coaching job. Virginia Tech is a great job. There's going to be a lot of head coaches that look at Virginia Tech and say, "Give me that job." Why do I say that? Well, for one, you're in the ACC, which is more gettable than the Big Ten, at least you don't have to come in here and say, hey, I have to totally resurrect all the resources there like you would have to at UCLA. Virginia Tech, that Hokie fan base, electric. They're getting blown out by Old Dominion. They're 0-2 to start the year, and they're still selling out Lane Stadium, which is an electric atmosphere. 70,000 people, a lot of college stadiums that are struggling to get fan bases out there. UCLA is not one of them. Lane Stadium, that fan base, electric. People sleep on the hotbed that is the state of Virginia from a recruiting standpoint, which, hey, UCLA has the hotbed of Southern California, but Virginia is very unique because you'll go Florida, Texas, California, top 3 states for recruits. You'll go Georgia's 4, you'll go Ohio's 5, Virginia is probably 6. Sneaky recruiting hotbed. And Penn State's come down and they've infiltrated. You'll get some schools like Tennessee and whatnot, and some SECs infiltrating. That's all good, because one thing that Virginia Tech can benefit from is all these Virginia guys that go elsewhere. They go to Ohio State, they go to Penn State, they go to Tennessee. If you miss on them the first time in the transfer portal era, Virginia Tech has the ability to capture some of those guys coming back. And then with all the small schools around the Virginia area, Old Dominion, Marshall, I don't know my Virginia geography and as well. I just know this exists. For all the studs that are there, and they've been doing this as of late, you can poach the top receiver from Old Dominion. You can poach the top receiver from Marshall. And I'm sure as I say that, Hokie fans are like, Max, there's 3 other schools right there. Sweet. Go get them. Virginia Tech is a really good head coaching job, and I think there's no reason, and I could say this about North Carolina, but Virginia Tech has more football tradition. You go Miami, Florida State, and Clemson are in that tier 1. Right now, it's probably Miami and Clemson, but there's no reason Virginia Tech can't be right in that second tier with Florida State. I think, Georgia Tech might have something to say about that, but you get my point. Virginia Tech is a really good head coaching job. Fascinated to see who they ultimately end up getting. They should not have problem with candidates. I think that's a job that a lot of people would want.